The sadness that has been sitting behind your ribs was never the rent you had to pay to be loved. Just take a second to really let that sink in. It's such a striking, evocative way to think about the invisible weight that so many of us carry around every single day. And honestly, it completely challenges everything we've ever been taught about holding on to our hidden emotional baggage.
So welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking a truly fascinating spiritual framework from our source material today. We're going to explore how to handle deeply rooted anxiety, unspoken grief, and the sheer physical toll of just keeping it all bottled up inside. It offers this incredibly unique methodology for releasing that weight, and as you'll see, the way it visualizes this whole process is just so vivid.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We'll be mapping out this journey across 5 sections. First, the jar of sadness. Then, confronting quiet theology, followed by the mechanics of casting. After that, a 3-beat practice, and finally, long-term emotional unloading. Part 1. The jar of sadness, the invisible vessel. Our material kicks things off by offering this incredibly powerful way to visualize hidden pain. It asks us to imagine this invisible vessel. The whole metaphor here is that sadness acts like a liquid. It's collected from unspoken griefs, missed moments, quiet losses, and it's stored right under your collarbone. You know that physical ache you sometimes get right there in your chest? Well, this jar isn't filled all at once. It accumulates, drop by drop, across many, many seasons. Maybe someone taught you early on that crying disturbs the peace, or maybe an unspoken grief just found a small room inside you and permanently moved in.
And to manage this filling jar, we instinctively react physically. Think about it. We usually use our hands as lids. It's a totally defensive posture, literally clamping down, gripping tight so the outside world doesn't see all that sloshing inside. We guard it. But this framework pushes for a profound shift, turning those hands into cups. This represents an open, willing posture. It's about being ready to finally stop guarding and start releasing what's been pouring into you for years.
Now, what's really interesting here is what happens when you keep that lid on. It's not just pure, primary sadness in that jar anymore. When sadness sits for too long, it literally curdles into secondary liquids. We're talking about the shame of being sad longer than people expect you to be, or the guilt of burdening a room. Maybe it's the fear that this heavy version of you is permanent, the absolute exhaustion of pretending you're fine every day, or a quiet bitterness just sitting right at the bottom. Every single drop counts, and it's making the whole shebang so much heavier.
Part 2. Confronting quiet theology, unlearning the rules. So, to actually empty this jar, we first have to unlearn some deeply ingrained rules, what the text calls quiet theology. There's this sharp critique of conventional, stoic religious expectations. It contrasts a false portrait of the divine with the true Father. The false portrait is the sterile administrator, right? A figure who flinches at messy emotion, gets super impatient, and demands a polished, smiling version of you by next Sunday. Well, the text completely rejects that. Instead, it presents a divine figure with an infinite capacity for messy, honest hearts. And most importantly, a figure with absolutely zero overflow valve when it comes to holding your grief. Which brings us to a really profound shift in perspective. Carrying emotional weight is not a lack of faith, and it is certainly not a private failure. Have you ever blamed yourself for just feeling heavy? Well, it is simply the natural physics of a vessel that has been filled up with absolutely no way to let anything out. Growing more stoic isn't going to fix it. Realizing that heaviness is just physics, not a character flaw, is absolutely crucial. It's the first real step to finding relief.
Part 3. The mechanics of casting. 1 Peter 5:7.
The theological turning point for dealing with all this heaviness is actually rooted in a biblical text, 1 Peter 5:7. It was written by a tired fisherman to scattered, exhausted believers who had lost almost everything. The verse tells them to cast their anxieties. And this is a real game changer because it perfectly illustrates the core action of the framework. Lifted straight from life on the water, throwing a heavy casting that requires your whole body. It's a forceful, complete transfer of weight. It is not delicate management. It's not some half motion where you keep a grip on the edges. You are throwing the weight completely out of your own hands. So, what exactly goes into this net? Literally all of it. You don't just cast the curated, polite anxieties you'd be comfortable sharing with a group. You throw the unnameable ones, the deeply embarrassing ones, the anxieties that keep changing shape, and the griefs that have outlasted everyone's patience. Think of the things you won't even admit to yourself. You transfer the entire contents of the jar.
Part 4. A 3-beat practice, the daily rhythm.
So how do you actually do this? The framework prescribes a very specific, actionable methodology for your daily life. It's a rhythm you're meant to repeat.
This daily rhythm is broken down into a 3-beat practice: naming it, casting it, and breathing. Let's look closely at exactly why it's designed this way and how you can apply it.
Step 1. You name the sadness out loud, even if it's just a whisper in an empty kitchen. Why? Because an unnamed sadness feels infinitely large, right? The mind kind of can't measure it. When it's just this abstract, blurry feeling, it takes over everything. But by speaking it aloud, saying, "This grief about my mother," or "this fear about my job," you put borders on it. You literally shrink the weight down to its actual, measurable size.
Step 2 is the physical casting. You open your hands, palms up, and then you turn them gently outward, away from your chest, kind of like you're handing a heavy bowl to someone right in front of you. And while you do this, you say one exact, unfiltered sentence: "I am pouring this into you." No strings attached, no elaborate explanations needed, just a complete release.
And step 3 focuses on the physiology of trauma. You let your out-breath last just a little longer than your in-breath. Listen, for years, your autonomic nervous system has probably been bracing for impact, taking these wide inhales and shallow exhales, holding readiness just a little too tight. A slow exhale completely interrupts this response. It signals to your body that the impact isn't arriving because the weight has just been transferred to someone else. Part 5. Long-term emotional unloading, the physics of relief.
Now, what happens when you do this day after day? The source material gives us a very realistic timeline for this physics of relief. Because your body has hauled this weight for seasons, relief doesn't just happen magically overnight. At 10 reps, it might just feel like an empty ritual. But stick with it. Around 30 reps, you might notice the air in the room actually feels a bit wider. Past 50 reps, you might sleep through the night without mentally rehearsing your grief. And past 100 reps, you realize the jar feels noticeably lighter, even if your external circumstances haven't changed one bit.
That number right there, 100, is super significant. Real noticeable relief from profound grief requires sustained, daily habituation. Think about it. Your interior has no filing category for relief yet. You have to literally teach the jar what empty feels like through continuous repetition. You have to train your body to stop holding on to the burden.
But there is a vital distinction to remember here. Cast the sadness without casting the softness. Your grief isn't a failure, you guys. It's the natural cost of being a soft-hearted, empathetic person. The goal of this framework isn't to turn you cold or stoic. No way. The goal is to shed the toxic freight that seasons and people have unfairly loaded onto you, all while retaining the beautiful tenderness that makes you who you are. And as you shed that freight, your body responds. The text calls these the first invoices. Basically the receipts your body sends back to thank you for stopping the storage of all this emotional baggage. You might actually taste a meal again. You might wake up without that dull, familiar ache behind your sternum. Or you might suddenly notice your shoulders are no longer unconsciously climbing up towards your ears. Your body literally begins to physically let go. Ultimately, all of this builds to a central mantra that you're meant to carry forward, almost like a small lamp down a dim corridor. What you pour into me does not pour out the other side. It's this beautiful reminder that the receiving hands in this framework are infinitely capable of holding whatever you pour out permanently. It is not going to spill back on you.
We've unpacked a deeply visual, powerful framework for emotional release today. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look inward for just a moment. What unnamed weight is currently sitting in your jar waiting to be cast? Take care of yourselves and keep learning.